The photographs told a story of contentment. A family of 4 standing on the lawn of their newly purchased colonial home on Ashwood Drive. David Thurmond, 34, tall with sandy brown hair always combed neatly to the side. One arm wrapped around his wife Eleanor, 32, her signature auburn hair cascading over her shoulders. In front of them stood their children, Michael, 9, already showing his father's height and strong jaw, and Jessica, 6, with her mother's bright eyes and gentle smile, clutching a warm teddy bear she called Butterscotch. It was late spring of 1977, when the Thurmond family vanished from the small town of Millfield, Pennsylvania, a place where American flags decorated front porches year-round, and neighbors still brought casseroles when someone fell ill. The disappearance left no clear evidence of struggle, no ransom demand, no apparent motive, just an empty house with dinner half prepared on the kitchen counter and a television still warm from recent use. Millfield, with its population barely reaching 8,000 in the mid-1970s, had never experienced a mystery of this magnitude. The town sat nestled in a valley 2 hours west of Philadelphia, surrounded by rolling hills that turned brilliant shades of red and gold each autumn. It was the kind of place where most residents left their doors unlocked and where the arrival of a new family warranted mention in the weekly Millfield Herald. The Thurmonds had moved to Millfield in September of 1976, just 8 months before their disappearance. David had accepted a position at Lancaster Regional Bank, where his background in finance made him a promising new hire. Eleanor, a former elementary school teacher, had chosen to stay home with the children, but had recently begun substitute teaching at Millfield Elementary, where both Michael and Jessica were enrolled. They seemed like the perfect family, recalled Vivian Morley, now 92, who lived across the street from the Thurmonds in 1977. They were always together, gardening, playing catch in the yard, washing that station wagon of theirs on Sunday afternoons, the kind of family you'd see on television. But behind this picturesque facade, threads were already unraveling, threads that would not be discovered until decades later. Tuesday, May 17, 1977, began like any ordinary day in Millfield. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of lilac and fresh-cut grass. David Thurmond left for work at 7:45 a.m., according to bank records that would later be scrutinized by investigators. Security footage, grainy and monochromatic as was standard for the era, showed him arriving at Lancaster Regional Bank at 8:23 a.m., briefcase in hand, nodding to the security guard as he passed through the revolving doors. Eleanor was seen by multiple witnesses that morning. She dropped the children off at Millfield Elementary at 8:10 a.m., waving from behind the wheel of the family's 1975 Ford Country Squire station wagon, its distinctive wood paneling, making it easily identifiable. At 10:15 a.m. she stopped at Henderson's grocery, purchasing items for that evening's dinner: chicken, potatoes, carrots, and a chocolate cake mix. Jessica's favorite, according to the checkout clerk who remembered the transaction. She seemed completely normal, Margaret Henderson, daughter of the store owner, later told investigators. She mentioned something about Jessica's upcoming dance recital and how excited the little girl was. Nothing that would make you think anything was wrong. Michael was logged as present for the entire school day. His third-grade teacher, Donna Reynolds, recalled him being particularly engaged during their afternoon science lesson about the solar system. Jessica, in first grade, participated in Reading Circle and was awarded a gold star for correctly reciting her weekly spelling words according to school records. David Thurmond left the bank at 4:47 p.m. Security footage showed him exiting through the same revolving doors, pausing briefly to check his wristwatch before walking toward the employee parking lot where his dark blue 1976 Oldsmobile Cutlass was parked. This would be the last time David Thurmond was captured on camera. By all accounts, the last confirmed sightings of the Thurmond family members were mundane. No distress signals, no unusual behavior, no indications that by the next morning, all 4 would be gone without a trace, leaving behind a mystery that would haunt Millfield for nearly half a century. The first indication that something was amiss came from Philip Harrison, the school bus driver who had been driving Route 7 for over 15 years. On the morning of Wednesday, May 18, he noticed that neither Michael nor Jessica Thurmond were waiting at their designated stop at the corner of Ashwood and Maple. It wasn't entirely unusual for kids to miss the bus, Harrison explained in his initial police statement. But the Thurmond children were always there, always on time. Eleanor was particular about that. I remember thinking maybe they were sick, or maybe their father drove them that day. By 9:30 a.m. Millfield Elementary had followed standard procedure and placed calls to the Thurmond residents to inquire about the children's absence. The calls went unanswered. At Lancaster Regional Bank, David's supervisor, Richard Gaines, noted his absence at the morning staff meeting the first time David had missed work without calling in advance. It wasn't until 5:15 p.m. that day that the first official concern was registered. Eleanor's mother, Virginia Caldwell, had planned to visit from her home in Harrisburg, arriving for dinner and to attend Jessica's dance recital scheduled for the following evening. When repeated knocks on the Thurmonds' front door went unanswered, she peered through windows and saw the house lights on, but no movement inside. Virginia Caldwell contacted the Millfield Police Department at 5:42 p.m. Officer Thomas Kent was dispatched to perform a welfare check at 6:17 p.m., arriving at the Thurmond residence at 6:20. What Officer Kent discovered would become the foundation of one of Pennsylvania's most perplexing cold cases. The Thurmond home was undisturbed, but eerily suspended in time. The front door was locked, as were all windows and the back door. After Virginia Caldwell provided a spare key, Officer Kent entered to find no signs of struggle or forced entry. In the kitchen, raw chicken sat on a cutting board, a knife beside it. Potatoes were half peeled in the sink. A cake mix box was open on the counter, its contents unmeasured. It looked like someone had been in the middle of making dinner and just walked away, Officer Kent noted in his report. The television in the living room was switched on, tuned to what the TV guide would later confirm was the Tuesday evening broadcast of Happy Days on ABC. The family's 1975 Ford station wagon was parked in the garage. David's Oldsmobile was nowhere to be found. Upstairs, the beds were made. The children's school clothes for Wednesday were laid out on their respective beds. In the master bathroom, a tub was filled with now cold water, bath salts partially dissolved at the bottom, suggesting Eleanor had been preparing to bathe when something happened. Most notably, there were no signs of packing. All suitcases remained in the hall closet. The family's passports were found in David's desk drawer. Eleanor's purse containing her wallet, driver's license, and $43 in cash sat on the kitchen counter. The only items confirmed missing were the clothes the family had been wearing on Tuesday and David's car. By 7:15 p.m., Officer Kent had called for backup. By 9:30 p.m., the house had been declared a potential crime scene. By midnight, an all-points bulletin had been issued for the Thurmond family and David's Oldsmobile Cutlass. The investigation had officially begun, but the Thurmonds had already been missing for over 24 hours. The disappearance of the Thurmond family triggered the largest search effort in Millfield's history. Chief Walter Brennan mobilized the entire police force, all 12 officers, and coordinated with state police and neighboring counties. Volunteers from the community formed search parties that combed the surrounding woods, fields, and abandoned properties. David's Oldsmobile was discovered 2 days later, on May 20, parked at the Millfield Bus Depot, a small station serving regional Greyhound routes. The vehicle was locked, with no visible signs of distress or struggle inside. The keys were missing. Bus depot employees could not confirm seeing the Thurmonds, and the station's rudimentary security system consisted of a single camera covering only the ticket counter, not the parking area where the car was found. Investigators immediately requested passenger manifests for all buses departing Millfield between Tuesday evening and Thursday morning. The lists revealed no tickets purchased under the Thurmond name. However, The station operated on a cash basis with minimal identification requirements in 1977, making it impossible to verify if the family had traveled under assumed names. The bus depot discovery initially pointed us toward a voluntary departure, reflected Detective Samuel Morrison, who joined the Millfield Police Department 3 years after the disappearance, but became obsessed with the case throughout his 40-year career. But why leave dinner half-prepared? Why not pack luggage? Why leave Eleanor's purse and all their identification documents behind? Nothing aligned with a family choosing to disappear. The initial investigation followed standard protocols for missing persons cases. Investigators interviewed neighbors, colleagues, teachers, and acquaintances. They examined financial records, phone logs, and recent activity. They distributed flyers featuring school photographs of Michael and Jessica, alongside driver's license photos of David and Eleanor. What emerged was a portrait of a family that appeared, on the surface, to be living an enviable life. David Thurmond was regarded as competent and amiable by his colleagues at Lancaster Regional Bank. Though he had only been employed there for 8 months, he had already received a positive performance review and was considered for eventual promotion to senior loan officer. Bank records showed healthy finances, a mortgage being paid on time, modest savings, a small investment portfolio, and no unusual transactions in the weeks preceding the disappearance. Eleanor Thurmond was described as devoted to her children and active in the community despite their relatively short time in Millfield. She had joined the local garden club, volunteered at the school library, and was helping to organize the summer festival scheduled for July. Interviews with other mothers revealed no conflicts or concerns, only positive impressions of a warm, organized woman who seemed genuinely happy in her role as mother and part-time substitute teacher. Michael and Jessica were both performing well academically and socially. Michael had joined the Cub Scouts and the elementary school chess club. Jessica was enrolled in ballet lessons at Miss Patricia's dance academy and had recently been selected to perform a solo in the spring recital, the very event her grandmother had come to attend. There were no red flags, said Chief Brennan in a press conference held 1 week after the disappearance. No domestic disturbances, no reports of unusual behavior, no known enemies. It's as if this family simply evaporated from existence. But as the investigation deepened, hairline cracks began to appear in the Thurmond's perfect facade. The first significant development came from David Thurmond's employment history. While his resume claimed he had left his previous position at First Keystone Bank in Philadelphia due to relocation preferences, investigators discovered he had actually been asked to resign following discrepancies in loan application processes. Richard Mendez, who had been David's supervisor at First Keystone, reluctantly revealed the circumstances in a telephone interview. It wasn't embezzlement or anything that severe. Mendez clarified, David had been approving loans for applicants who didn't quite meet our criteria, nothing that would constitute fraud, but bending the rules enough that it raised eyebrows in order. When confronted, he claimed he was just trying to help deserving families who were falling through institutional cracks. This revelation prompted investigators to scrutinize David's work at Lancaster Regional more closely. A review of his loan approvals showed similar patterns, borderline applicants receiving favorable terms, documentation that was complete but minimally sufficient. However, no clear evidence of wrongdoing emerged, and his supervisor insisted that David's work, while occasionally unorthodox, remained within acceptable parameters. More intriguing was the discovery of a safe deposit box in Eleanor's name at Commonwealth Bank in Philadelphia, not Lancaster Regional, where David worked, nor any bank in Millfield. The box had been opened 3 months before the family's disappearance. When accessed by investigators with a court order, it contained $5,000 in cash, a handwritten letter addressed to someone named Catherine, but never sent, and a collection of newspaper clippings about industrial development in western New York State. The letter, dated March 8, 1977, began conventionally, Dear Catherine, I hope this letter finds you well. It's been too long since we have spoken. but then veered into cryptic territory. The situation has become complicated. David doesn't know I have made contingencies, but after what happened in February, I can't take chances. If you don't hear from me by July, please contact my mother. She has instructions. Investigators could find no record of a Catherine in Eleanor's known associates. Her mother, Virginia Caldwell, denied any knowledge of instructions and claimed her daughter had never mentioned concerns about her safety or marriage. Friends from Eleanor's college years and former colleagues from her teaching days in Philadelphia were located and interviewed, but none knew of anyone named Catherine who had been close to Eleanor. The newspaper clippings presented another puzzling element. They focused on the construction of a chemical manufacturing plant near Buffalo, New York, a city with no known connection to the Thurmond family. The articles specifically highlighted local opposition to the plant due to environmental concerns, potential health risks, and alleged connections between the manufacturing company, North Star Chemical, and organized crime figures in the region. Why Eleanor Thurmond, a former elementary school teacher, living 300 miles away, would collect these articles remained unexplained. No connection could be established between David Thurmond and North Star Chemical or any of its executives. The safe deposit box opened up more questions than it answered. Detective Morrison said, "Was Eleanor planning to leave David? Was the family being threatened? Was there some connection to this chemical plant controversy that we couldn't see?" The letter suggested fear, but of what? The money suggested preparation, but for what? As spring turned to summer in 1977, the investigation continued to uncover these fragmentary insights, none of which provided a coherent explanation for the family's disappearance. Meanwhile, local interest in the case remained intense, with Find the Thurmonds posters appearing in shop windows throughout Millfield and surrounding towns. In July 1977, 2 months after the disappearance, investigators received their first significant lead. A waitress at a diner in Ithaca, New York, approximately 200 miles north of Millfield, reported serving a family matching the Thurmonds' description. The man was tall with sandy hair. The woman had this gorgeous reddish hair, and there were 2 children about the right age, stated Doris Wilkins in her witness report. What caught my attention was the little girl's teddy bear. It was worn and had this distinct golden brown color. When I commented on it, the girl called it butterscotch, which I remembered because my granddaughter has a cat with the same name. Local police in Ithaca followed up immediately. The family had paid in cash, left no credit card trail, and no one had recorded their vehicle. However, the restaurant owner recalled the man mentioning they were passing through on their way to Canada. This sighting triggered an expansion of the search to include Canadian border crossings, but with minimal identification requirements for U.S. citizens entering Canada in 1977, particularly at smaller crossing points. The trail quickly went cold. No border agents could confirm seeing the family, and no records existed of anyone using the Thurmond name to cross during the relevant time period. The Ithaca lead took on additional significance when investigators noted its proximity to Buffalo, the focus of Eleanor's newspaper clippings. However, inquiries to local law enforcement in Buffalo regarding the North Star chemical plant controversy revealed that construction had been halted following a court injunction filed by environmental groups. The company's executives denied any knowledge of the Thurmond family, and no evidence emerged connecting David's banking career to financing for the project. Throughout the remainder of 1977, scattered reports of sightings emerged across the Northeast. A family resembling the Thurmonds checking into a motel in Vermont, a man matching David's description withdrawing cash from a bank in Maine, a woman and 2 children who resembled Eleanor, Michael, and Jessica boarding a ferry to Nova Scotia. Each lead was investigated, each ultimately proving inconclusive or mistaken. By the 1-year mark of the disappearance, the investigation had stalled. The Millfield Police Department, with its limited resources, could not sustain the intensive focus on a case with no fresh evidence. The FBI, which had provided consultative assistance, had categorized the disappearance as voluntary absence, based on the lack of evidence of foul play. despite the peculiar circumstances. Eleanor's mother, Virginia Caldwell, refused to accept this classification. In May 1978, on the anniversary of the disappearance, she held a press conference on the lawn of the now vacant Thurmond home. "My daughter would never abandon her life without a word to me," she stated, her voice steady despite her evident grief. "She would never leave her purse behind. She would never allow her children to miss school without notification. Something happened to my family, and I will not rest until I know what." Virginia Caldwell would keep this promise for the remaining 19 years of her life, funding private investigators, maintaining a reward fund for information, and returning to Millfield each May to remind the public that the Thurmond family was still missing, not forgotten. She died in 1997 without answers, leaving behind a trust designated to maintain the reward fund in perpetuity. As decades passed, the Thurmond case gradually transitioned from active investigation to cold case status. The family home on Ashwood Drive was eventually sold at auction to cover the outstanding mortgage. New families moved in, most unaware of the property's history, until neighbors inevitably shared the story of the family who had vanished one Tuesday evening in May. The case periodically resurfaced in public consciousness. In 1985, the television program Unsolved Mysteries featured a segment on the disappearance, generating a temporary flurry of tips but no substantive leads. In 1992, a true crime book titled Vanished: The Thurmond Family Mystery was published, presenting the known facts alongside speculative theories ranging from witness protection program placement to elaborate insurance fraud to murder-suicide in a remote location. Detective Samuel Morrison, who had been present for the original discovery of the abandoned home though not yet a detective, inherited the case files when he was promoted in. Even as other detectives cycled through the department, Morrison maintained what his colleagues called the Thurmond Wall. In his office, a collection of photographs, timelines, and connections that grew more yellowed, but no less important over the years. "Some cases get under your skin," Morrison explained in a 2010 interview with the Millfield Herald, on the eve of his retirement. "You look at those school pictures of Michael and Jessica, and you think about what they might look like now, where they might be. Are they alive? Did they grow up without knowing their real identities? Or have they been lying in unmarked graves all this time while we failed to find them? These questions don't retire when you do." Morrison's retirement marked another milestone in the case's long, unresolved trajectory. His replacement, Detective Alicia Reinhardt, inherited both the official files and Morrison's personal research, including theories he had developed but never proven. Among these was his growing suspicion about David Thurmond's past. Before Philadelphia, Morrison had uncovered discrepancies in David's educational records. His claimed attendance at Cornell University's business program could only be partially verified, with a 2-year gap that remained unexplained. Additionally, acquaintances from David's Philadelphia days mentioned occasional references to time spent out west, though David's official employment history showed no positions west of Pennsylvania. Morrison believed David Thurmond wasn't exactly who he claimed to be. Detective Reinhardt noted in her case review, not necessarily in a criminal sense, but in terms of his background, there were gaps, inconsistencies. In the pre-digital era, it was easier to reshape your history. Morrison thought whatever David was hiding might be key to the family's disappearance. But proving these theories became increasingly difficult as witnesses aged, memories faded, and physical evidence deteriorated in storage. By 2017, 40 years after the disappearance, the case had become a historical curiosity rather than an active investigation. The children, if alive, would be 49 and 46 years old. David and Eleanor would be in their 70s. The prevailing theory among law enforcement had settled into a grim consensus. The family had likely met with foul play. Their remains never discovered, the peculiar circumstances, dinner being prepared, bath drawn, no luggage packed, strongly suggested an interruption rather than a planned departure, despite the car at the bus depot. Alternative theories involving witness protection, escaping criminal threats, or establishing new identities remained popular in online forums dedicated to unsolved mysteries, but lacked substantiating evidence. And so the case might have remained an enduring mystery, a cautionary tale, a perpetually unanswered question in the history of Millfield, Pennsylvania. Until February 14, 2024, when a real estate agent named Constance Weber entered the attic of 47 Ashwood Drive to investigate a leak reported by the current homeowners, and discovered a padlocked steamer trunk that had been concealed beneath floorboards for what appeared to be decades. The discovery of the trunk might never have happened if not for an unusually harsh winter and the curiosity of a 7-year-old boy. The Bennett family had purchased 47 Ashwood Drive in 2019, attracted by the historic character of the colonial home and unaware of its notorious history. Thomas and Rebecca Bennett had moved from Boston with their young son Ethan, seeking the quieter pace of small-town life. During a particularly severe cold snap in January 2024, a pipe in the attic froze and burst, causing water damage to the ceiling of the second-floor hallway. While awaiting repairs, young Ethan became fascinated with the access hatch to the attic, which had been opened by the plumber and left accessible as they waited for replacement parts. Ethan kept talking about hearing noises from the attic. Rebecca Bennett later told reporters, "We assumed it was just the house settling, or maybe squirrels. But he was persistent. One day, while I was on a work call, he took a flashlight up there. When he came down, he was talking about weird boards in the corner." Thomas Bennett investigated his son's discovery and found several floorboards that, while identical in appearance to the others, had been cut and refitted to create a concealed compartment, approximately 6 feet long and 3 feet wide. The compartment was nearly invisible unless one knew exactly where to look. Situated in the darkest corner of the attic behind a chimney stack. "I probably wouldn't have noticed anything unusual if Ethan hadn't pointed it out," Thomas admitted. "The craftsmanship was remarkable. You could walk over those boards 100 times and never realize they were different from the others." Concerned about potential structural issues, the Bennetts contacted their real estate agent Constance Weber, who arranged for a contractor to examine the area. When the modified floorboards were carefully removed on February 14, they revealed the trunk of vintage steamer style with leather straps and brass fittings, secured with a heavy padlock. The trunk itself bore no identifying marks, no labels, no indications of its contents or ownership. The padlock was substantial and showed no signs of rust, suggesting it might have been added shortly before the trunk's concealment. Initially unaware of the home's connection to the Thurmond case, the Bennetts considered simply breaking the lock. However, Weber, who had grown up in Millfield and recognized the address, suggested contacting the police first, just to be safe. Detective Alicia Reinhardt arrived at 47 Ashwood Drive within 30 minutes of receiving the call. Now in her 50s and nearing retirement herself, Reinhardt had maintained Morrison's interest in the Thurmond case throughout her career. The moment she entered the attic and saw the trunk, she recognized its potential significance. "The timing fits," she noted in her initial assessment. This house changed hands in 1978 after the Thurmonds disappeared. Then again in 1986, 1999, 2000. Multiple renovations occurred during those years, including a major attic conversion in 1999 that was later reversed yet somehow this trunk remained undiscovered. The trunk was carefully removed from the attic and transported to the Millfield Police Department's evidence room, where it was photographed, tested for fingerprints, and examined for trace evidence. The padlock, determined to be a master lock model manufactured between 1974 and 1979, was picked by a locksmith rather than cut, preserving it as evidence. When Detective Reinhardt finally opened the trunk on February 16, 2024, nearly 47 years after the Thurmond family disappeared, the contents immediately confirmed its connection to the case. Inside were items that could only have belonged to the missing family: Eleanor's wedding album, David's Cornell University diploma, partial records now confirmed as legitimately earned, Michael's Cube Scout uniform, Jessica's ballet slippers, miniature size, never worn for the recital that never occurred. Deeper in the trunk were documents, life insurance policies for all 4 family members, their social security cards, birth certificates, vaccination records, the essential documentation of their existence. But it was the bottom layer of the trunk's contents that would transform the understanding of the case. A handwritten journal belonging to Eleanor Thurmond, its final entry dated May 17, 1977, the day the family vanished. Alongside it lay a sealed envelope addressed to Virginia Caldwell, to be opened only in the event of my death, and a microcassette tape labeled simply Evidence. After nearly half a century, the Thurmond family had, in a sense, finally come home, not in flesh and blood, but in artifacts and words that might at last reveal what happened on that spring evening, when dinner was left half prepared, and a family of 4 vanished without a trace. The contents of Eleanor's journal, her letter to her mother, and the microcassette recording would soon shed light on decades of speculation, revealing a truth both more complex and more tragic than anyone in Millfield had imagined. As Detective Reinhardt prepared to examine these final pieces of evidence, she knew that whatever secrets they held would forever change the narrative of a case that had haunted her career and her community for generations. The mystery of the Thurmond family was about to enter its final chapter. The evidence room of the Millfield Police Department had changed little since 1977. The same fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow on metal shelving units, labeled with case numbers spanning decades. The room smelled of paper, dust, and the lingering traces of countless investigations, some solved, many not. Detective Alicia Reinhardt sat at the central examination table, her posture rigid with anticipation. Before her lay the contents of the steamer trunk, each item now carefully catalogued, photographed and placed in archival quality evidence bags. Only Eleanor Thurmond's journal remained unbagged, open to its first page, waiting to reveal secrets held for nearly half a century. "I need to document this properly," Reinhardt murmured to herself, positioning a digital recorder beside the journal. At 54, she had spent more years investigating the Thurmond disappearance than Eleanor Thurmond had spent alive. The case had become the defining mystery of her career, an inheritance from her mentor, Detective Morrison, who had passed away in 2018, never knowing the truth. She pressed record and spoke clearly. February 16, 2024. Detective Alicia Reinhardt, badge number 738, Millfield Police Department. Initial examination of journal recovered from 47 Ashwood Drive, believed to belong to Eleanor Thurmond, missing since May 7. The journal was bound in burgundy leather, its pages yellowed but intact. Eleanor's handwriting flowed across the pages in neat, deliberate cursive, the penmanship of a former elementary school teacher, accustomed to setting an example for young students. The first entry was dated September 8, 1976, the day after the family moved to Millfield. "We are finally settled in our new home. The children are asleep upstairs, exhausted from the move but excited about their new rooms. David seems relieved to be away from Philadelphia. I want to believe this move will solve everything, that we can truly start fresh here. The house is beautiful. Everything I dreamed of when we were cramped in that apartment. The neighbors seem kind. Perhaps here we can be the family we pretend to be." Reinhardt paused, struck by the last line. The family we pretend to be. Already, in the very first entry, a suggestion that the Thurmond's perfect image concealed deeper truths. She continued reading, moving through entries that documented the family's first months in Millfield. Many entries were mundane: Michael's progress in school, Jessica's excitement about ballet lessons, Eleanor's adjustment to the smaller town after city life. But periodically concerning notes appeared. October 17, 1976. David came home late again. When I asked where he'd been, he mentioned a work dinner, but his tie was in his pocket, not around his neck. He smelled of something I couldn't identify, not alcohol or perfume, something chemical. When I pressed him, he became irritated. saying I was being paranoid. November 24, 1976. David received a phone call during Thanksgiving dinner. He took it in his study, speaking too quietly for me to hear. When he returned to the table, his mood had shifted entirely. He barely touched his food and kept checking his watch. Later, I found him burning papers in the backyard. When asked, he claimed they were old work documents no longer needed. He's lying. I know him too well not to recognize it. December 8, 1976. The hang-up calls have started again. Just like in Philadelphia, someone calls, says nothing, then hangs up. David insists it's just wrong numbers, but they always come when he's not home. I have started keeping track 3 this week alone. As winter turned to spring in the journal entries, Eleanor's concerns escalated. In February 1977, a significant event occurred that seemed to trigger a change in her perspective. February 22, 1977. I can no longer pretend. What I found in David's briefcase today confirms my worst fears. The documents mention North Star Chemical and something called Project Cerulean. There were financial projections, environmental impact minimizations, and a list of names, some highlighted, others crossed out. One name was circled, Catherine Decker, Environmental Protection Agency. When confronted, David became furious, then frightened. He admitted he's involved in something complicated, but swears it's nothing illegal. He claims people are depending on him, that backing out now would put us all at risk. He begged me to trust him, said it would be over soon. For the children's sake, I agreed to be patient, but I have made preparations just in case. Tomorrow I will open a safety deposit box in Philadelphia. What David doesn't know can't hurt him or us. Reinhardt stopped reading, her mind racing. Catherine Decker, this must be the Catherine mentioned in the letter found in Eleanor's safe deposit box. And North Star Chemical, the company featured in the newspaper clippings Eleanor had collected. A quick search on her department laptop confirmed that Catherine Decker had indeed been an EPA investigator in the 1970s, specifically focusing on industrial compliance with the recently established Clean Water Act and Clean Air Act. Further searching revealed something even more significant. Catherine Decker had died in a single-car accident near Buffalo, New York on April 8, 1977, just 6 weeks before the Thurmond family disappeared. The official report ruled the crash accidental, noting that Decker's vehicle had veered off a rural road during heavy rain. However, a local newspaper article quoted a colleague expressing surprise, describing Decker as meticulous and an exceptionally careful driver, especially in adverse conditions. Reinhardt returned to the journal, turning pages with increasing urgency. March 15, 1877. David received another package today. He didn't know I was home when the courier delivered it. I watched from the upstairs window as he opened it in the garage, removed something small, then burned the packaging in our trash barrel. He's been making calls from payphones instead of home. Last week he claimed to be working late, but Richard from the bank mentioned at the school fundraiser that David had left early that day. The lies are multiplying. April 10, 1977. The news about Catherine Decker is devastating. David claims no knowledge beyond what was in the newspapers, but he couldn't meet my eyes when discussing it. I have called the number Catherine gave me twice, but no answer. I'm beginning to fear what David might truly be involved in. The children sense the tension. Michael asked me yesterday why Daddy keeps checking the windows at night. The entries through late April and early May documented Eleanor's growing determination to uncover the truth about her husband's activities. She described following him one evening to a meeting with an unidentified man in a parking lot outside Lancaster. She noted increased hang-up calls and a black sedan she believed was surveilling their home. Then came the entry from May 13, 1977, just 4 days before the family's disappearance. I found the documents David tried to destroy. They were only partially burned in the fireplace when he was called away to the phone. North Star isn't just building a chemical plant. They are developing something called Compound C67. classified by the government, but potentially dangerous enough that even their own scientists have expressed concerns. Catherine was investigating water contamination near their test facility when she died. The EPA has been silenced through political connections. The documents included a memo about managing whistleblowers and containing potential exposure, both literally and figuratively, it seemed. David's name appears as a financial consultant arranging funding through channels that won't trigger regulatory oversight. He's helping them hide money, perhaps unknowingly helping them hide much worse. I confronted him tonight after the children were asleep. I have never seen him so afraid. He didn't deny anything, just kept saying, "You don't understand what they are capable of." When I mentioned going to the authorities, he became frantic, saying they had people everywhere and that Catherine had thought she could fight them too. The implication was clear. He begged me to be patient, claimed he had a plan to extricate himself. He's given them financial models suggesting the project isn't viable, hoping they will abandon it without suspecting his true motives. He says we need just a few more weeks. Then we can leave not just Millfield, but the country. I don't know if I believe him anymore. I have made my own plans. The children's safety must come first. The next entry, dated May 16, the day before the disappearance, was brief, but chilling. David received a call this afternoon that left him ashen. All he would say is, "They know." He's insisting everything is fine, that we should continue as normal. That he's packed a small bag and hidden it in his car trunk. He doesn't know I saw him. I have decided to contact Agent Harlow tomorrow. David will be furious, but I can't live with this fear anymore. The children deserve better than this shadow life. The final entry, dated May 17th, 1977. The day of the disappearance was written in a noticeably hurried hand. Something is wrong. David called from work, told me to take the children and go to my mother's immediately. His voice was strange, controlled, terrified. When I asked what happened, he said, "They found the projections. They know I have been sabotaging the funding." Before I could question further, he said, "Someone was coming to the house. Someone we shouldn't be here to meet. He's coming home now to get us." I'm writing this while packing essentials for the children. The black car is back, parked down the street. I have called Agent Harlow and left a message with his office. David should be here any minute. If anything happens to us, let the truth be known. North Star Chemical and their compound C67 are dangerous. People have already died to keep this secret. We might be next. The journal ended there. The final page contained no conclusion, no resolution, only the abrupt termination of a narrative that had built to this moment of crisis. Detective Reinhardt sat back, processing the implications. After decades of speculation, Eleanor Thurmond's journal suggested a scenario no one had considered. The family hadn't simply disappeared. They had fled, or attempted to flee, from a threat connected to corporate malfeasance and possible government complicity. Agent Harlow, Reinhardt murmured, making a note. This was a new name. Someone Eleanor apparently trusted enough to contact in her moment of crisis. If this person could be identified and located, they might provide critical information. But the most immediate evidence potentially lay in the microcassette tape labeled Evidence, found alongside the journal. Reinhardt carefully removed it from its evidence bag and examined it. The small tape appeared intact, though finding a functional microcassette player in 2024 would prove challenging. A call to the department's evidence technician confirmed they no longer maintained such equipment. However, retired Detective Morrison, ever the traditionalist, had donated his old investigative equipment to the department upon his retirement. Among these items, preserved in the storage room, was a working microcassette recorder from the early 90s. Once located and tested with a blank tape, the recorder appeared functional. Reinhardt inserted Eleanor's cassette, pressed play and leaned forward. Static filled the room, followed by a woman's voice, presumably Eleanor, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. "This is Eleanor Thurmond. Today is May 12th, 1977. I'm recording this conversation with my husband as evidence of what he's become involved in. He doesn't know I'm recording. Background noises suggested a household in evening quietude. Distant sounds of a television, occasional creaks of an old house settling. Then, a man's voice became audible. Eleanor, you need to understand how complicated this is. These people, they are not just businessmen. North Star is backed by serious political connections. The chemical compound they are developing has military applications. That's why the oversight is being circumvented. Eleanor's voice. And you helped them do this? Not intentionally. Not at first. I was contracted to create financial models, structure the funding. By the time I realized what they were really doing, I was already implicated. The paperwork has my name all over it, but Catherine was investigating them, wasn't she? Before her accident. A long pause followed, then David's voice lower. Yes. She had water samples from downstream of their test facility. The contamination levels were significant. When she tried to escalate it within the EPA, she hit barriers, political appointees blocking investigation. When she threatened to go public, his voice trailed off. They killed her, Eleanor finished flatly. I can't prove that. But yes, I believe they did. And now you are afraid they will do the same to you? To us? I have been feeding them false projections, Eleanor. Manipulating the financial models to make the project look less viable than it is. I thought if I could get them to abandon it for economic reasons, it would end without suspicion falling on any whistleblower. But if they realize what I have done, we should go to the FBI, Eleanor insisted. You don't understand. I have seen documentation suggesting federal agencies are involved in suppressing this information. Some of these people are connected to intelligence operations. Going to authorities might be walking right into their hands. So what's your plan? We just keep living here, pretending everything is normal while you secretly work against people who have already killed once. I have contacts, people who can help us disappear if necessary. But it has to be done right with proper preparation. If we panic and run, they will find us. The recording continued, capturing the Thurmonds discussing options, whether to contact journalists, whether to gather more evidence, whether to trust David's unnamed contacts. The conversation revealed a man desperately trying to correct a mistake that had spiraled beyond his control, and a woman torn between fear for her family's safety and moral outrage at what her husband had become involved in. Near the end of the recording, their voices became more urgent as they heard what sounded like a car pulling up outside their home. David's voice. Were you expecting someone? Eleanor. No. It's after 9. Footsteps. Then silence as presumably one of them checked through a window. David again, now tense. It's them. Black sedan, 2 men. The same car from last week? Yes. Get away from the window. They haven't approached the house yet. They are just watching. Eleanor's voice shook slightly. What do we do? Nothing tonight. Act normal. Tomorrow, I will contact. The recording ended abruptly, cutting off David's final words. Whether Eleanor had stopped recording deliberately or the tape had run out remained unclear. Detective Reinhardt replayed the recording twice more, taking detailed notes. The revelation that David Thurmond had been involved with a potentially dangerous chemical compound development, that he had apparently turned against his employers, and that the family had been under surveillance shortly before their disappearance transformed understanding of the case entirely. The final piece of evidence from the trunk, the sealed letter addressed to Virginia Caldwell, might provide additional context. Although Virginia had passed away in 1997, the letter was now evidence in an ongoing investigation. Reinhardt carefully opened it, preserving the envelope as evidence. Inside was a 3-page handwritten letter, dated May 4th. Dear Mother, if you are reading this, something has happened to me, and possibly to David and the children as well. I pray this letter never reaches you, that we resolve our situation safely, and I can destroy it myself. But I can no longer ignore the danger we are in, and I must ensure that someone knows the truth. David has become entangled with dangerous people. He was contracted as a financial consultant for a company called North Star Chemical, which is developing a compound called C. The project has been classified by the government, ostensibly for national security reasons. But I believe the real reason is that the compound is extraordinarily dangerous to human health and the environment. An EPA investigator named Catherine Decker discovered contamination from the test facility. She died in what was ruled an accident on April 8. But David believes she was murdered to prevent her from exposing the truth. Now David, having recognized the gravity of what he's involved in, has been working to undermine the project from within by manipulating financial projections. If his sabotage is discovered, we fear similar retribution. We are being watched. A black sedan has been parked near our home multiple times. Our phone rings with calls from no one. David has been meeting with someone he claims can help us disappear if necessary. But I don't know who this person is or if they can be trusted. I have recorded conversations with David as evidence and collected what documentation I could find. If we disappear under suspicious circumstances, this is why. The evidence is in a safe place that only you can access with the enclosed key. Look for a storage locker under my maiden name in Lancaster, Unit. If anything happens to us, please take this information to someone you trust, completely in federal law enforcement, not local authorities, as David believes North Star's influence is far-reaching. A man named Agent Timothy Harlow at the Philadelphia field office has been recommended as trustworthy. I have attempted to contact him, but haven't yet connected. I love you, Mother. Please forgive me for keeping this from you. I hope to protect you from this darkness. But now I fear we may need your help more than ever. With all my love, Eleanor. Enclosed with the letter was a small key, with a tag bearing the number. Reinhardt carefully placed the letter back in its evidence bag, her mind racing with implications and immediate next steps. If Eleanor had indeed placed additional evidence in a storage unit, that material might still exist, though after 47 years, the likelihood of the unit remaining untouched seemed slim. More pressingly, the identity of Agent Timothy Harlow needed to be confirmed, along with any record of Eleanor's attempted contact. If Harlow was still alive, he might hold crucial information about the case. But the most disturbing question loomed larger than all others. What had happened to the Thurmond family after Eleanor's final journal entry? Had they fled, been abducted, killed? And what of North Star Chemical and the mysterious compounds? The investigation accelerated over the following days as Detective Reinhardt pursued multiple lines of inquiries simultaneously. First, she researched North Star Chemical, discovering that the company had indeed existed until 1983, when it was acquired by a larger conglomerate and its operations absorbed. Corporate records from that era were sparse and largely undigitized, but what she found confirmed that North Star had operated a facility near Buffalo focused on agricultural chemical innovations and specialized industrial compounds. No public record mentioned Compound C67 specifically. However, newspaper archives revealed that in late 1977, several months after the Thurmond's disappearance, local environmental groups had renewed protests against the facility, claiming unusual health issues among residents living downstream. By 1979, the facility had been shut down, with North Star citing economic considerations rather than environmental concerns. Through FBI contacts, Reinhardt confirmed that Timothy Harlow had indeed been a special agent assigned to the Philadelphia field office from 1974 to 1988, specializing in white-collar crime and corporate malfeasance. More significantly, Harlow was still alive at 84, living in a retirement community in Virginia. A telephone call yielded initial reluctance, but when Reinhardt mentioned Eleanor Thurmond and North Star Chemical, Harlow's tone changed dramatically. "I have been waiting for this call for 47 years, he said, his voice weathered but clear. "I always knew someone would eventually find what Eleanor left behind." 2 days later, Reinhardt sat across from Harlow in the common room of his retirement community, recording their conversation with his permission. Though physically diminished by age, Harlow's mind remained sharp, his recollection detailed. Eleanor Thurmond contacted my office on May 17, 1977. Harlow confirmed, consulting a small notebook he had brought with him. I was in the field that day. My secretary took a message saying only that Mrs. Thurmond needed to speak with me urgently regarding North Star Chemical. When I returned to the office late that afternoon and received the message, I called the Thurmond residence immediately. There was no answer. The following day, after multiple attempts to reach her, I learned the family had been reported missing. Given what was happening with North Star at that time, I was concerned. What exactly was happening with North Star? Reinhardt asked. Harlow glanced around the common room, then leaned forward. The Bureau had received multiple whistleblower reports about their operation near Buffalo. Compound C-67 was designed as a defoliant for military use, similar to Agent Orange, but allegedly more targeted. However, early tests showed severe toxicity beyond the intended scope. Catherine Decker's EPA investigation had identified contamination in groundwater that matched C-67's chemical signature. The problem, Harlow continued, was that North Star had powerful protection. The project had been classified under national security provisions, and several prominent officials had personal financial stakes in the company. Any investigation faced immediate roadblocks. When Decker died, those of us tracking the situation had suspicions, but proving murder was impossible. Did you investigate the Thurmond disappearance? Unofficially, yes. The official investigation remained with local authorities, but given the North Star connection, I made inquiries. I learned that David Thurmond had indeed worked as a financial consultant for North Star through his bank. His role involved structuring funding that would avoid certain regulatory triggers that might have exposed the project to additional scrutiny. And what did you discover? Harlow's expression darkened. Not enough. North Star executives denied any knowledge of the family beyond David's professional capacity. Their security firm, a private contractor with former intelligence personnel, claimed no surveillance had been conducted. Every lead I pursued either disappeared or was blocked by superiors citing jurisdictional concerns or lack of evidence connecting the disappearance to any federal matter. Harlow reached into his pocket and removed a small, yellowed newspaper clipping. But then this appeared in July 1977, in a small Canadian newspaper. The clipping showed a photograph of a fatal car accident on a rural road in Quebec. The caption noted that 4 unidentified bodies had been recovered from a vehicle that had apparently veered off a cliff: a man, a woman, and 2 children. The timing and circumstances were suspicious, Harlow explained. The bodies were badly damaged in the fire that followed the crash. Identification was difficult in that era, particularly across international jurisdictions. Canadian authorities eventually classified them as a family named Thompson, who had been reported missing from Ottawa, though the evidence for this identification was questionable. You believe it was the Thurmonds? I believe it's possible. The accident occurred in a remote area known for its difficult driving conditions. It's also worth noting that 3 days after this accident, surveillance on several North Star whistleblowers suddenly ceased. It was as if a threat had been neutralized. But you never confirmed this theory? Harlow shook his head. By 1979, when I had finally accumulated enough evidence to justify reopening the investigation, circumstances changed dramatically. North Star's Buffalo facility was shut down. The company's military contracts were cancelled. Key executives resigned. The entire C-67 project was officially terminated and classified as a failed research initiative. My superiors considered the matter closed, and my requests to continue investigating were denied. What about Eleanor's storage locker? Did you know about that? Harlow's eyebrows rose. Storage locker? No, this is the first I'm hearing of it. Eleanor's mother never contacted me. If there was additional evidence, his voice trailed off, implications hanging in the air between them. After nearly half a century, crucial evidence might still exist. Lancaster Mini Storage had operated continuously since 1973. though ownership had changed hands multiple times. The current manager, initially resistant to discussing a 50-year-old rental without a court order, became more cooperative when Detective Reinhardt explained the circumstances. A search of their paper records the facility had only computerized their system in the late 1990s, confirmed that Unit 27 had indeed been rented by Eleanor Caldwell, Eleanor's maiden name, in March 1977. More surprisingly, the rental agreement had never been terminated. "We have had a few of these legacy rentals," the manager explained. "People set up automatic payments, then forget or pass away. As long as the payments keep coming, we keep the unit." Miss Caldwell's payments come quarterly from a trust account at First Pennsylvania Bank. The trust, Reinhardt would later confirm, had been established by Virginia Caldwell before her death in 1997, with instructions to maintain the payments in perpetuity. With the original key from Eleanor's letter and proper documentation, Reinhardt gained access to Unit 27 on February 28. The small 5x5 storage unit contained a single item, a fireproof document safe, approximately 2 feet square, with a combination lock. The combination was not included in Eleanor's letter. However, after consulting with the Thurmond case files, Reinhardt tried the children's birth dates, a common choice for family-related security. The lock opened on the second attempt, using Jessica's birth date. Inside the safe were meticulously organized folders containing what appeared to be evidence Eleanor had collected regarding North Star Chemical, photocopies of internal memos discussing compound C67 and its environmental impacts, preliminary toxicology reports showing concerning results, financial documents bearing David Thurmond's signature, demonstrating how funding had been structured to avoid regulatory scrutiny, correspondence between North Star executives and government officials, suggesting improper relationships, a detailed letter from Catherine Decker to Eleanor, dated April 1, 1977, just days before Decker's death, outlining her concerns and the barriers she faced in her investigation. Most significantly, the safe contained a thin file labeled Contingency, holding Canadian identification documents for a family of 4: David, Eleanor, Michael, and Jessica Thompson. The photos were clearly of the Thurmond family, though David had grown a beard and Eleanor's distinctive auburn hair appeared darker. Also included were Canadian social insurance numbers, employment references, and a deed to a property in rural Quebec. The final item in the safe was a handwritten note from David to Eleanor, undated. "If you are reading this, we have had to implement the contingency. Remember our agreement: no contact with anyone from the past, not even your mother. I know that's painful, but it's the only way to keep all of us safe. The Thompson identities are completely clean. The Canadian property is paid for. We will be okay. The contact in Montreal will provide everything else we need. We meet him tomorrow at the location discussed." After that, David and Eleanor Thurmond ceased to exist. "I'm sorry for bringing this darkness into our lives. I promise you, this new beginning will be different." The evidence suggested that the Thurmonds had planned their own disappearance not as a desperate flight, but as a carefully orchestrated escape utilizing pre-arranged alternate identities. The timing aligned with Harlow's newspaper clipping about the fatal accident in Quebec. Had the Thurmonds successfully escaped to Canada, only to die in a tragic accident? Or was the accident staged to eliminate both the Thurmond family and the threat they posed to North Star's operations? Reinhardt carefully returned everything to the safe, secured it, and arranged for proper evidence collection. The contents would need to be thoroughly examined and authenticated by forensic experts. The investigation now faced a critical decision point. If the bodies in the Quebec accident were indeed the Thurmonds, their remains might still be identifiable through modern DNA analysis, potentially bringing final closure to the case. But if the accident had been misidentified or staged, there remained the slim possibility that the Thurmond family or some members of it might still be alive, living under assumed identities. Michael would now be 56, Jessica 53. If they had survived, would they even know their true identities? Or had they grown up as the Thompson children, unaware of the dangerous circumstances that had forced their parents to flee their former lives? As Detective Reinhardt drove back to Millfield, her mind raced with possibilities. The trunk found in the attic of 47 Ashwood Drive had answered many questions about why the Thurmond family had disappeared, but the ultimate question, what had happened to them, remained tantalizingly unresolved. The evidence pointed toward a corporate conspiracy, government complicity, and a family's desperate attempt to escape dangers they had never anticipated when David Thurmond accepted what seemed like an ordinary consulting job. The truth had remained hidden for nearly 5 decades, preserved in a journal, a microcassette, and documents sealed away by a frightened mother trying to protect her children. Now, as Reinhardt prepared to coordinate with Canadian authorities to investigate the 1977 accident, she couldn't shake the feeling that the final revelation would be both more complex and more heartbreaking than anyone had imagined. What she couldn't know as she drove through the winter night was that in a small coastal town in Nova Scotia, a 56-year-old school principal named Michael Thompson had just returned home to find a letter in his mailbox with no return address. A letter containing only a faded photograph of a family standing in front of a colonial home on Ashwood Drive, and a message scrawled on the back. "They never stopped looking. Neither did I. It's time for the truth." The Thurmond mystery was about to enter its final, most startling phase. Wind-sculpted pines lined the narrow coastal road leading to Rockport, Nova Scotia, their branches swaying against a slate-gray February sky. Detective Alicia Reinhardt watched the scenery through the passenger window of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police cruiser, her mind still processing the developments of the past week. Beside her, RCMP Inspector Claire Desjardins navigated the winding route with the confidence of someone who had traveled it countless times. "Rockport isn't what you'd call a bustling metropolis," Desjardins remarked, breaking the contemplative silence. Most families have been here for generations. The Thompson family stands out because they aren't generational residents, but they have been here long enough to become part of the community fabric. "Since when exactly?" Reinhardt asked, consulting her notes though she already knew the answer. According to local records, the Thompsons arrived in August 9. David Thompson found work as an accountant at a regional fishing cooperative. Eleanor Thompson taught at the local elementary school. The children, Michael and Jessica, were enrolled in school that September. 3 months after the Thurmond family had vanished from Millfield, Pennsylvania, the Thompson family had materialized in Rockport, Nova Scotia. "And you are certain the accident victims were never definitively identified?" Desjardins nodded. "I have reviewed the original investigation files. The crash occurred on June 22, 1977, on a remote stretch of highway in Quebec. The vehicle went over a cliff and burned extensively. This was decades before DNA analysis. Identification was based on dental records supposedly matching a family from Ottawa, but the documentation was questionable. In light of what we now know, I suspect deliberate manipulation." "By whom?" Reinhardt asked, though she had her suspicions. The investigating officer was a Sergeant Robert Landry. He retired in 1980, died in 1995. His notes mention federal consultation on the case, unusual for what was ostensibly a straightforward traffic accident. Looking back, the entire investigation appears designed to create a paper trail establishing the deaths of 4 individuals who physically resembled the Thurmond family. The cruiser crested a hill, revealing Rockport spread below them, a picturesque harbor town with colorful clapboard houses clustered around a natural bay. White fishing boats bobbed in the protected waters, and a lighthouse stood sentinel on a rocky outcropping. "Hard to imagine a better place to disappear," Reinhardt murmured. "That's always been the irony of witness protection, official or otherwise," Desjardins replied. "The best places to hide are often the most exposed, small communities where everyone knows everyone." where a stranger would be immediately noticed, but a family that arrives with the right background story, that integrates properly, becomes woven into the community's fabric. After a few years, no one remembers they weren't always there. As they descended toward the town, Reinhardt considered the enormity of what they were about to do, potentially upending lives that had been carefully reconstructed nearly 5 decades earlier. "Are we certain about this approach?" she asked. "Direct confrontation?" Michael Thompson requested the meeting himself once we made initial contact. "He knows why we are here." Desjardins glanced at Reinhardt. "This isn't just about solving your cold case anymore. These people have a right to know what you have discovered, that the danger they fled may have been real but is almost certainly gone now." They drove through Rockport's main street, past shops with hand-painted signs and a small diner with steamy windows. At the northern end of town stood Rockport Academy, a red brick school building, surrounded by playing fields now covered in snow. "Thompson has been the principal here for almost 20 years. Desjardins explained as they parked. "Highly respected educator. His sister Jessica lives in Halifax, works as a child psychologist. David Thompson died of heart failure in 2012. Eleanor still lives in the family home just outside town." The school was quiet, classes having ended an hour earlier. They were led to the principal's office by an administrative assistant who eyed the two investigators with poorly concealed curiosity. Michael Thompson stood as they entered, extending his hand in greeting. At 56, he was a tall, distinguished man, with sandy hair now streaked with gray. His features, the strong jaw, the straight nose, would have matched perfectly with an age-progressed image of 9-year-old Michael Thurmond. "Detective Reinhardt, Inspector Desjardins," he acknowledged, his voice measured and calm despite the circumstances. "Please, sit down." Once seated, Thompson opened a drawer and removed the letter that had prompted this meeting, the same letter mentioned at the end of Detective Reinhardt's case notes. He placed it on the desk between them. "I received this 3 days ago," he said. "No return address, postmarked from Philadelphia. When Inspector Desjardins contacted me yesterday about a Pennsylvania cold case, I knew it couldn't be coincidence." Reinhardt studied the photograph, the Thurmond family standing proudly before their colonial home on Ashwood Drive. On the back, the cryptic message, "They never stopped looking. Neither did I. It's time for the truth." "Do you recognize this family, Mr. Thompson?" Reinhardt asked, watching his reaction carefully. Thompson met her gaze steadily. "I recognize that I once was that boy. What I don't know is who sent this or why now, after all these years. We believe the C might refer to someone connected to Catherine Decker," Reinhardt explained. "An EPA investigator who died investigating North Star Chemical," Thompson finished. "Yes, I know the name. It's one of the few things my father shared about before." He leaned back, tension visible in his shoulders despite his composed demeanor. "My earliest clear memories begin in Rockport. I was 9, starting at a new school, learning to pronounce Canadian words properly, so other children wouldn't tease me. Before that, there are only fragments of bedroom with solar system decals on the ceiling, a swing set in a backyard, a dog named Rusty, who didn't come with us when we left. Your parents never explained why you moved." "Not until I was much older. Even then, the explanation was vague. My father had made powerful enemies through his work. People had died. We were in danger. The details were sparse, the message clear. Never speak of Pennsylvania. Never mention the name Thurmond. Never contact anyone from before." Thompson's gaze dropped to the photograph. "My sister and I grew up as the Thompson children. We had good lives here. Our parents made sure of that. But there was always this shadow, this sense that our family carried a secret that could never be spoken aloud." "When did you learn your birth name?" "Desjardins. When I was 18, preparing to leave for university. My parents sat me down and told me enough that I would understand the importance of maintaining the Thompson identity. They showed me my original birth certificate. explained that official records would list Michael Thurmond as presumed deceased. My father was explicit, rekindling that identity would endanger not just me but potentially my sister and mother as well. Thompson opened his desk drawer again and removed a worn envelope. From it he produced a Pennsylvania birth certificate for Michael David Thurmond, born October 3, 1967, to David and Eleanor Thurmond. "I have kept this hidden my entire adult life," he said. "When my father died in 2012, I considered looking into our past, but my mother became so distressed at the mere suggestion that I abandoned the idea. Now this arrives." He tapped the mysterious letter, and the next day, Canadian authorities contact me about a cold case in Pennsylvania. Reinhardt nodded. "We have made significant discoveries recently. A hidden trunk was found in your former home on Ashwood Drive. It contained your mother's journal, recordings, and documents related to North Star Chemical." She carefully outlined what they had learned: David's involvement with North Star, the dangerous compound C-67, the surveillance, and the family's planned escape using prepared identities. Thompson listened without interruption, his expression unreadable until Reinhardt mentioned the Quebec car accident. "That was staged, obviously," he said. "Part of the plan to make anyone looking for the Thurmonds believe they were dead. My father had connections, someone who helped people disappear. I never knew who. We believe it may have been Timothy Harlow," Reinhardt suggested, "an FBI agent who was investigating North Star. He claims he never knew about your family's escape plan, but certain inconsistencies in his statements suggest otherwise." Thompson shrugged. "The name means nothing to me. My parents never revealed who helped them. What's important now," Deschardy interjected, "is determining who sent this letter and why. If someone has connected Michael Thompson to Michael Thurmond, then the secret my parents guarded for nearly 50 years is unraveling," Thompson finished. "The question is, does that still put us in danger?" The Rockport Public Library occupied a converted Victorian home overlooking the harbor. Its reading room, with tall windows and a perpetually burning fireplace, stood empty on this winter afternoon, except for Eleanor Thompson seated in an armchair, her silver-streaked auburn hair illuminated by the fading daylight. At 79 she remained elegant, her posture straight, her hands steady as they rested on the book in her lap. When she looked up at their approach, Reinhardt immediately recognized the bright, intelligent eyes from photographs of Eleanor Thurmond, eyes that widened slightly with apprehension as she registered her son, accompanied by two unfamiliar women with the unmistakable bearing of law enforcement. "Mother," Michael said gently, "these are Detective Reinhardt from Pennsylvania and Inspector Desjardins from the RCMP. They are here about Milfield." Eleanor Thompson's composure wavered only momentarily before she carefully closed her book and set it aside. "I have been expecting this visit for 47 years, she said, her voice soft but unwavering, "though I'd begun to believe it might never come. Mrs. Thompson, or should I say Mrs. Thurmond?" Reinhardt began. "Thompson is the only name that matters now," Eleanor replied firmly. "Thurmond was another lifetime. We have found your journal," Reinhardt said, "and the recordings. The storage unit in Lancaster." A flicker of surprise crossed Eleanor's face. "The storage unit survived all these years? Mother never contacted Agent Harlow then?" "Virginia Caldwell maintained the rental payments until her death," Reinhardt explained. "She established a trust to continue them afterward. The evidence you preserved has been crucial to understanding what happened." Eleanor nodded slowly. "She was following my instructions. Keep the payments. Say nothing unless I contacted her. I never did. It was too dangerous, even after years had passed. David insisted we maintain absolute separation from our past." "Mrs. Thompson," Desjardins said, "we need to ask about this letter your son received." She produced the photograph with its cryptic message. Eleanor took it with trembling fingers, studied it, then closed her eyes briefly. "Where is Jessica? She should be here for this conversation." "She's on her way from Halifax," Michael assured her. "She will arrive this evening." Eleanor nodded, seeming to gather her strength. Very well. First, understand that what we did, leaving as we did, staging the accident, assuming new identities, it wasn't criminal evasion. It was survival. We know about North Star Chemical and Compound C67, Reinhardt said. About Catherine Decker's investigation and her death. Catherine, Eleanor murmured. I have thought about her so often over the years. She was brave in a way few people are willing to risk everything for the truth. She looked up sharply. This letter is signed C. You think it's connected to Catherine? That's impossible. She died before we left Millfield. Could it be a relative? Someone who knew her? Eleanor shook her head. Catherine had no children. Her parents were already deceased when we knew her. She had a sister somewhere in the Midwest, but we never met her. What about colleagues? Desjardins suggested. Someone who continued her work? Eleanor's gaze grew distant. There was someone, a young lawyer, who was helping her build a case. I never met him, only heard his name in phone conversations. Christine? Christiansen? No, Christopher. Christopher Decker. Her nephew, I believe, though considerably younger. Reinhardt made a note. We will look into it. The more pressing question is whether you are still in danger. North Star Chemical was dissolved decades ago. Most of the executives involved would be dead or extremely elderly now. The company may be gone, but corporate malfeasance of that magnitude rarely exists without government complicity. Eleanor said. Those connections could have survived, and the evidence I collected implicates several people who had promising political futures ahead of them. Some may still be in positions of power. The gravity of her words hung in the air. Even after nearly 5 decades, the truth they had fled might still pose a threat if exposed. There's something else you should know, Eleanor continued. Something not in my journal or recordings. Something David only told me after we were safely in Canada. She leaned forward, lowering her voice though they were alone in the reading room. Compound C67 wasn't just a defoliant. Its development was part of a classified program exploring chemical compounds that could target specific genetic markers. In effect, weapons that could affect particular ethnic populations more severely than others. David discovered this when he accessed financial records showing parallel research tracks, one public-facing, focused on agricultural and conventional military applications, and another buried under classified budgets. Reinhardt and Desjardins exchanged shocked glances. That would violate international law, Desjardins said. Precisely why it was so deeply buried, Eleanor replied. When Catherine began investigating water contamination near the test facility, she had no idea what she'd stumbled upon. But her water samples contained genetic markers that pointed to something far more sinister than conventional toxins. When she tried to escalate her concerns, she encountered barriers at every level. She approached David because of his financial access to the company, Reinhardt surmised. Eleanor nodded. She needed to understand how the funding was structured to identify who was really behind the program. David helped her, and in the process discovered his own unwitting complicity. He'd been laundering research money, making military funding appear as conventional corporate investment. When he realized what he'd facilitated, he tried to sabotage it, Reinhardt finished, recalling the journal entries. Yes, he manipulated financial projections, created artificial cost overruns, introduced delays through bureaucratic means, anything to make the project appear unviable without raising suspicions about his motives. But they discovered what he was doing. Eleanor's hands twisted in her lap. The night we disappeared, David received a phone call from his contact within North Star. They had scheduled an audit of his work. They knew we had perhaps hours before they would come for him, for all of us. We activated the contingency plan he'd been quietly preparing. The Thompson Identities, Desjardins said. Yes. Agent Harlow helped us, though unofficially. He'd been building a case against North Star for months, but kept hitting jurisdictional walls and classification barriers. He couldn't protect us through official channels, but could provide the means for us to disappear. The accident in Quebec was staged with the help of contacts Harlow trusted. The bodies were unidentifiable medical cadavers. Once we were officially dead, we crossed into Canada with our new identities and made our way to Rockport. Eleanor looked toward the window, watching snowflakes beginning to fall against the darkening sky. We spent years looking over our shoulders, expecting them to find us. David struggled with guilt both over his inadvertent role in the program and over taking the children away from their home, their friends, everything they knew. He was a good man who made a terrible mistake and spent the rest of his life trying to atone for it. And now someone has found you, Reinhardt said gently. Someone who signs their letters as C. Eleanor turned back, her expression resolute. If it's Christopher Decker, Catherine's nephew, then perhaps it's finally time for the truth to emerge. The evidence I collected, combined with whatever he may have from Catherine's investigation, it could be enough after all these years to expose what really happened. Assuming the principals are still alive to be held accountable, Desjardins noted. Some might be, but more importantly, the truth deserves to exist in the world, Eleanor replied. My grandchildren deserve to know their actual family history, not the sanitized version we created. Michael and Jessica deserve to reclaim the identities they lost. She reached for her son's hand. I'm sorry, Michael. Your father and I did what we believed necessary to protect you and your sister. The fear was real. The danger was real. But perhaps we carried the secret longer than we needed to. Michael squeezed his mother's hand. You gave us good lives, Mom, different than they might have been, but good. Detective, Eleanor said, turning to Reinhardt. What happens now? That depends largely on what you want to happen, Reinhardt replied. There's no legal impediment to you reclaiming your original identities. The evidence from the storage unit and the trunk would support reopening investigations into North Star. Though after so many years, criminal prosecution becomes challenging. And this letter? Eleanor gestured to the photograph still on the table between them. How do we find who sent it? We start in Philadelphia, Reinhardt said. If Christopher Decker exists, we will find him. The offices of Decker Environmental Justice Foundation occupied the 14th floor of a glass tower in downtown Philadelphia. The foundation's logo, a stylized tree with roots forming the initials CD, adorned the reception area, where Reinhardt and Desjardins waited 2 days later, having flown directly from Nova Scotia. Christopher Decker proved easy to locate, a prominent environmental attorney who had established the foundation 30 years earlier to support legal challenges against corporate polluters. His assistant had arranged the meeting as soon as Reinhardt mentioned Catherine Decker and North Star Chemical. The man who emerged from the inner office was in his early 70s, silver-haired and distinguished in a charcoal suit. His resemblance to photographs of Catherine Decker was subtle but unmistakable in the shape of his eyes and the determined set of his jaw. Detective Reinhardt, Inspector Desjardins, he greeted them, extending his hand. I have been hoping someone would connect the dots eventually. In his spacious office, walls lined with environmental law texts and framed court decisions, Decker confirmed what they had already suspected. Yes, I sent the letter to Michael Thompson, he admitted, or Michael Thurmond to use his birth name. I have known who the Thompsons really were for nearly 20 years. How? Reinhardt asked simply. My Aunt Catherine's investigation never died with her, Decker explained. She was meticulous about her work, maintained duplicate records of everything. After her accident, her personal effects came to my father, her brother, who stored them in his attic without examining them. I was in law school when he passed away in 1991, and while clearing his house, I found boxes of my aunt's papers. Decker walked to a wall safe behind his desk, entered a combination, and removed a thick folder. Among them was her correspondence with Eleanor Thurmond, notes about David's assistance, and documentation about Compound C-67 that Catherine had begun compiling for a whistleblower complaint. The evidence was fragmentary but disturbing, pointing to classified research on ethnically targeted chemical agents. Why didn't you come forward then? Desjardins asked. I did in a way. I established this foundation, built my career, challenging corporate environmental crimes. But regarding North Star specifically, the company no longer existed. The principals had scattered to other positions or retired, and the Thurmond family was presumed dead. What could be gained by resurrecting a decades-old conspiracy? But something changed, Reinhardt prompted. Decker nodded, opening the folder to reveal newspaper clippings, photographs, and handwritten notes. In 2005, I was consulting on a case involving groundwater contamination near a former military research facility. The chemical signatures were eerily similar to those my aunt had documented from North Star's facility. Following that connection led me to discover that several key North Star scientists had transferred to this military program after the company dissolved. The research had continued, Desjardins concluded, under deeper classification, with more careful compartmentalization. Yes, Decker confirmed. The program officially ended in 1998, but its research was preserved. Some of the compounds developed found their way into a classified bioweapons defense initiative that continues to this day. And the Thurmonds? Reinhardt asked. How did you find them? I didn't set out to find them, Decker clarified. I was tracking the careers of former North Star executives. One of them, in an interview for an industry publication in 2002, made a passing reference to the Thurmond incident as a turning point that led to greater security protocols. That suggested to me that the family hadn't simply been eliminated. They had escaped, possibly with assistance. From there, I used private investigators to search for families that had appeared in Canada in the appropriate time frame, with children matching the Thurmond children's ages. It took years of careful investigation, but eventually I identified the Thompsons of Rockport as the most likely candidates. I obtained yearbook photographs of Michael Thompson from his high school and compared them to age-progressed projections of Michael Thurmond. The match was compelling. Why wait until now to contact them? Desjardins. Decker's expression grew solemn. Because of what I discovered last year. He removed a final document from the folder, a confidential memorandum on government letterhead, heavily redacted but with the heading still visible. Legacy Containment Protocol. Thurmond North Star Classification Review. This was leaked to me by a source inside the Defense Department. It indicates that as recently as 2023, certain governmental entities were still monitoring for any emergence of the Thurmond case or related evidence. The classification review recommended maintaining the highest security level for all Compound C-67 documentation for another 25 years. You are saying the threat to the Thompson family is still active? Reinhardt asked, alarmed. Not in the same way it was in 1977, Decker replied. The immediate danger of elimination has passed. Too much time has elapsed. Too many of the original actors are gone. But powerful interests still want this history buried. The real threat now is to the truth itself. He closed the folder decisively. That's why I sent the photograph. Not to endanger Michael Thompson, but to prompt exactly what has happened, an investigation that would connect modern authorities to the evidence Eleanor preserved. Combined with my aunt's records and what I have gathered over the years, we finally have enough to expose the full story. To what end? Desjardins asked. As you said, the principals are mostly gone. Justice takes many forms, Inspector, Decker responded. For the Thurmond family, justice means reclaiming their true history. For my Aunt Catherine, it means vindication of her concerns after 5 decades. For the broader public, it means understanding how corporations and governments can collaborate to suppress truth and endanger lives. He turned to Reinhardt. The Thompson family, the Thurmonds, are they willing to come forward now? They are considering it, Reinhardt answered. Eleanor and her children are currently together in Rockport, reviewing their options. The revelation has been overwhelming for them, particularly for Jessica, who remembers almost nothing of her life before Canada, and the evidence from the trunk and storage unit being processed through proper channels. I have also spoken with retired Agent Harlow, who has agreed to provide a full statement about his role in helping the family escape. He's elderly and has little to lose now by telling the truth." Decker nodded, satisfied. "Then, perhaps after 47 years, this story can finally be told completely." 3 months later, on May 17, 2024, exactly 47 years after the Thurmond family's disappearance, a press conference was held on the steps of the federal building in Philadelphia. Detective Alicia Reinhardt stood to one side as Eleanor Thompson, flanked by her children Michael and Jessica, approached the microphone. "My name is Eleanor Thurmond," she began, her voice steady despite the emotional weight of reclaiming her original identity publicly for the first time in nearly 5 decades. "On this day in 1977, my husband David and I took our children and fled from our home in Millfield, Pennsylvania, believing our lives were in danger." As she outlined the circumstances of their disappearance, David's unwitting involvement with North Star Chemical, the dangerous research into ethnically targeted compounds, Catherine Decker's investigation and death, the surveillance and threats that forced them to assume new identities. The assembled press fell into stunned silence. Christopher Decker followed her at the podium, presenting the combined evidence from his aunt's records, Eleanor's preserved documentation, and his own decades of research. Representatives from the Department of Justice announced the opening of a formal inquiry into the historical activities of North Star Chemical and related government programs, though they carefully noted the challenges of investigating events from so many decades earlier. Former FBI agent Timothy Harlow, now 84 and using a wheelchair, confirmed his role in helping the family escape and stage the Canadian car accident. "I violated protocols to protect innocent lives," he stated. "It was the only moral choice available to me at the time." The story dominated national headlines for weeks. 3 former government officials, now in their 80s and 90s, faced questioning about their knowledge of Compound C67 and the suppression of Catherine Decker's investigation. Classified documents from the era were reviewed for potential declassification. Environmental testing near the former North Star facility revealed lingering contamination that prompted a new cleanup initiative. For the Thompson-Thurmond family, the revelation brought both closure and new beginnings. Michael and Jessica legally reclaimed their birth names while maintaining their Canadian citizenship. Eleanor divided her time between Rockport, where she had lived for nearly 50 years, and Millfield, where she reconnected with old friends and visited David's grave. He had been buried as David Thompson in the Rockport Cemetery, his headstone now modified to acknowledge both the identity he was born with and the one he had adopted to save his family. The trunk discovered in the attic of 47 Ashwood Drive was eventually donated to the Smithsonian Institution as part of an exhibit on corporate whistleblowing and environmental justice. Catherine Decker's contribution was posthumously recognized with an EPA award established in her name to honor environmental investigators showing exceptional courage. Detective Alicia Reinhardt, whose career had been shaped by the Thurmond case since she inherited it from Detective Morrison decades earlier, found herself contemplating retirement with the satisfaction of having resolved the mystery that had haunted Millfield for generations. "Cold cases are never truly cold," she reflected in her final press interview. "They are just waiting for the right evidence, the right connections, the right moment when truth can finally emerge from shadow." On a crisp autumn day, later that year, Eleanor Thurmond stood before the colonial house on Ashwood Drive, her home for just 8 months in 1976-77, but a place that had defined nearly 5 decades of her life through its absence. The current owners, the Bennett family, had graciously invited her to visit, curious to meet the woman whose hidden trunk had sparked such an extraordinary chain of revelations. As Eleanor walked through rooms both familiar and strange, memories cascaded: Michael racing down the hallway with a model airplane, Jessica practicing ballet positions in the living room, David at the dining table reviewing financial documents late into the night, moments from a life interrupted, a family fractured and reformed. In the kitchen, where she had been preparing dinner when David called with the warning that forced them to flee. Eleanor paused, placing her palm flat against the countertop. "We left so much behind," she murmured to Detective Reinhardt, who had accompanied her for this emotional visit. "Not just possessions, but possibilities, the lives we might have lived here. Yet you built new lives," Reinhardt observed. "Protected your children, preserved the evidence that would eventually bring the truth to light." Eleanor nodded, a complex mixture of grief and pride crossing her features. "David used to say that our greatest accomplishment wasn't escaping, but creating something meaningful from what remained. He never forgave himself for the danger he brought into our lives, but he was so proud of who Michael and Jessica became." She moved to the kitchen window, looking out at the yard where the children had played briefly in another lifetime. "I have often wondered what he would think of all this, the truth finally exposed. The identity we guarded for so long now, public knowledge, whether he would feel vindicated or terrified." "What do you think?" Reinhardt asked. Eleanor considered the question, watching as autumn leaves drifted across the lawn of a house that had been both the beginning and end of the Thurmond family's original story. "I think he would say what matters most isn't the name we carried," she replied finally, "but that we carried each other through the dark, that the family, who disappeared from this house in 1977, never actually vanished. We just became something different, something perhaps stronger for having been tested so severely." She turned from the window with a small, resolute smile. "And I think he would be gratified to know that after all these years, the truth finally found its way home just as we have." As Eleanor Thurmond walked out of the house on Ashwood Drive for what would likely be the final time, she paused on the front step, looking back over her shoulder at the place where one life had ended and another begun. The mystery that had persisted for 47 years had finally been solved. Not through a dramatic breakthrough or sensational revelation, but through the patient preservation of truth by those who understood its value. The Thurmond family had disappeared on a spring evening in 1977, leaving dinner half-prepared and the community bewildered. The explanation, when it finally emerged nearly half a century later, spoke to the lengths people will go to protect those they love, the persistence of those who seek justice, and the enduring power of truth to emerge even after decades of darkness. The locked trunk in the attic had contained more than evidence. It had preserved a story waiting to be told, a mystery waiting to be solved, and a family's legacy waiting to be reclaimed from the shadows of history.